Tony Kinnett.
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 Host of the Tony Kinnett Cast.
Let's get down to business.
You're listening to the Tony Kinnett Cast on 93 WIBC.
Here on the Daily Signal.
Good evening and welcome to the Tony Kinnett Cast. I'm Tony Kinnett here live from the new studio, and it's great to be with you as hopefully you're seeing kind of the show setup get just a little bit better every evening. And if you're listening on the radio in any of our syndicated radio stations, whether that's Indianapolis, whether that's in Arkansas, Colorado, down in Florida, or up in Pennsylvania and Wisconsin, you should head over to the live stream and check it out there. That's over at the Daily Signal. You can find that on YouTube, on X, and that's where a lot of our great comments and shenanigans take place as well. And there are far more things to dig into than just a new studio update, because the fallout from the 2024 presidential election and down the ballot races are continuing to rock the world. And by the way, it is right now when you need to keep in mind that a lot of people who tell you that it doesn't really matter who the president of the United States is or who they are going to be or which party controls the halls of Congress, and that how grown adults see those events is not exactly worthwhile as far as a contribution to the economy, international affairs. They are not only lying to you, they are either willingly ignorant or ignorantly willful in their foolishness. So let me explain why. On November 5th, an account called Brew Markets, which likes to claim it's some kind of millennial-esque news outlet for market research, posted that a friendly reminder that the stock market doesn't care about your politics. Oh man, you shouldn't really worry about who you vote for because the stock market's going to be fine either way. And they showed this like really zoomed out map. And I mean zoomed out, I mean it includes like the last 10, 11 presidents. And the stock market like slowly climbing up. What they don't show you is that during the Biden administration, there's like the stock market going down considerably. And the other side of that is that after the presidential elections, in which Donald Trump is set to become the next president of the United States, he is now once again the president-elect, that over $1.28 trillion was added to the stock market yesterday. And furthermore, the S&P 500 books have again hit record high stocks. It really is insane. I've never seen, at least as far as the stock market climb, just reach the heights that it has just in response to a presidential election. The Dow gained yet another 259 points today. That's a 60th, or it is 0.6% of the Dow Jones total value. The S&P gained, the NASDAQ gained. Oil decreased in price a little bit. And again, that is because Donald Trump plans to drill, baby, drill. In fact, he went as far in his victory speech as to tell RFK Jr. that he's allowed to touch anything. You can have anything in this kingdom except oil. Oil is indeed going to continue growing. And the market's just surging forward because, unlike his first administration, in which Donald Trump promised that for every new regulation he would cut 2 regulations, now Trump is promising a ratio of 1 to 4. Additionally, the markets are surging because now people very, very clearly understand the product of a Trump administration for the economy. And so now people are trying to get in, as it is said, on the ground floor. It's kind of the interesting thing about the second time in our nation's history that we've had a split presidential second administration in this way. Because what you're seeing is the entire country react rather strongly to the good things contrasted against the really horrible things in Joe Biden's administration versus the good things in Trump's first administration. And that brings us to the Trump staffing set. Anyone will tell you, including Donald Trump himself, that the staffing of his first presidential administration, when he openly admits, and by the way, has openly admitted for a couple of years now that he had very little idea of what he was doing, he was an outsider, now the staffing appears to be shored up from the beginning. So we don't have to go through the first couple of years of really bad staffers in the bureaucracy of the federal government that rules by regulatory fiat, and then lose the triumvirate that Trump had in 2016 before he really started affecting excellent policy. Now we're seeing something a little bit different, and that starts with Susie Wiles, basically the head of Trump's campaign, who is the first ever female chief of staff. And Susie Wiles, I think, is a pretty solid pick because she kept Trump extremely disciplined throughout his entire campaign. She knows how to get things done. She is. And by the way, I think it's really hilarious that, again, here it is. Trump was the first president to appoint the first openly gay member to his cabinet, although the guy didn't actually stress how gay he was as a part of his, as like a part of his persona. It just happened to like dudes. And now you have Susie Wiles, a woman, the first ever chief of staff. So if Trump, who also secured the largest Hispanic portion of the vote of any Republican president, and has also secured a large portion of, in modern times, the black electorate demographic vote, Trump is doing a really horrible job of being a white supremacist, like male misogyny Hitler with all of the trimmings, I guess. So far, just pointing out, Trump's running actually a far more diverse campaign and a far more meritocratic campaign and administration than the Democrats have done at all. Who couldn't stop talking about how wonderful it was that Karine Jean-Pierre was black and a lesbian. And then when Karine Jean-Pierre would get up in front of the American people and embarrass herself about 10 times a day, then it would reflect really poorly on people who were black and who were lesbians. Because when you make your entire persona, your color and your whoever it is that you like, then the only judgment that is left after you goof up is on the things that you have bragged about. It turns out that merit is a far better judge of character. And, just pointing out, that's why Condoleezza Rice was one of the best staff members of the Bush administration. Had very little to do that she was a black woman. She just did a good job. So moving on just a little bit here, we have already started to see the burgeoning, flowering petals of the resistance. Ah, yes, resisting Trump 2.0. We're back, guys. We're going to resist Donald Trump and his mean stinkiness. We're going to hold back his fascisms. Oh, so brave. So first you have Governor Pritzker, who looks like he's eaten Portillo's every day for the last 10 years. Get in front and say, Trump's not going to touch our illegal immigrants with his deportation. You have to come through me. The dude looks like a water tanker. But anyway, here's old Pritzker in Illinois.
One who intends to come take away the freedom and opportunity and dignity of Illinoisans. I would remind you that a happy warrior is still a warrior. You come for my people, you come through me.
Brave, strong, manly, tubby. Great. Yeah, I really do enjoy this. By the way, I should also point out that it's really hilarious watching Gavin Newsom in California trying to do the same thing. The man who just had a ton of his own state scalped away from him, as Californians don't even want the garbage that has poured through his administration in the last couple of years. And you just have desperation at this point. Democrats are openly calling that Biden should use the last 70-something days to put Kamala Harris on the Supreme Court, which is just the funniest thing ever. Kamala Harris, who cannot read. Kamala Harris, who doesn't even know what laws are. Kamala Harris, who has no idea what a tax break is and what giving money is, as a judge on the Supreme Court. LOL. I don't even think you would see Democrat senators try to push her through if Biden did that, which Biden doesn't. Biden hates Kamala Harris. Now we get to the media. And this is just the best part. So I could talk a little bit about how you had, Jimmy Kimmel weeping about how awful nights were. No one watches late night comedy hosts. Instead, I want to point out how you have outlet journos like Jen Rubin for the Washington Post making a fool out of herself online, and it is just delicious. So Jen Rubin posted, "The idea that we have to understand how or why Trump won to prepare to fight him is a category error. It is 1933. Hitler is in power. No time for a bleeping seminar on Democrats' messaging errors." Yes, please do this again, please. I really hope that the strategy of bringing out the Obamas to lecture black men and ignoring the complaints of Hispanic Americans and Asian Americans and Jewish Americans, and also calling men disgusting evil creatures, which is what you did with Bernie Sanders today, which is wild. and lambasting anyone who isn't just Yas Queen, the Democratic Party. Please run Hillary Clinton 4.0. Please run another Hillary Clinton in the next election. I can't wait. Well, we're going to talk a little bit later about some of the media, because now even the Axios co-founder is saying quite openly that it might be over for the legacy media. They're done. And I say this because there are now hundreds of thousands of subscriptions that are now completely falling away from traditional Democrat media affiliates, newspapers, and other outlets. And to talk about that, we're going to go to Rob Bluey, actually, the president of the Daily Signal, here in just a minute. Don't go anywhere. It's the Tony Kinnett Cast here on the Daily Signal, nationally syndicated and first on 93 WIBC.
Hey, Mark Needle is the only...
This is the Tony Kinnett Cast on 93 WIBC.
Welcome back to the absolute and utter collapse of the legacy media. I'm Tony Kinnett, joined this evening by Rob Bluey. He is the president of the Daily Signal. There's just a few times in media where you need to tap in the boss because so many things are going on at once. I'm just trying to keep all of the stories straight. You've got late night hosts collapsing, just in sadness over how they think no one is ever going to be alive anymore. And then you've got the View ladies wearing morning black and fighting with each other. And all of the news anchors on the left-leaning networks, they're just, my goodness, the just sadness at the hole that they've dug for themselves is so evident in their opening monologues. So, Rob, thanks for coming on. Just wanted to get a little bit of your perspective. What are you seeing on the ground in the media landscape out there in our nation's swampy capital?
Tony, thank you so much for having me. You are an awesome contributor to our team, and it's a privilege to work with you every day. And what better topic to talk about than one of our favorites, the media, and particularly the collapse of the legacy media. So to specifically answer your question, I think that there is still in the mourning stage, the disbelief stage. I don't think fully have comprehended what transpired on election night. And that is because they live in their elitist bubbles where they only circulate among themselves and only share stories and particular narratives that they want to push. And they're completely disconnected from the good folks in Indiana and the rest of the country. And that is a problem that they vowed to correct after the 2016 election. If you'll recall, many of these same outlets said, wow, we were taken by complete surprise by Trump's victory. We are going to do a better job of reporting what's happening in places in Middle America. And they have frankly failed to do that. I think that maybe there was an effort initially in 2016, 2017 to do that, but they quickly realized that they were biased at heart. They had no interest in really representing the views of those hardworking American people. And they found themselves now in a position where they're increasingly irrelevant.
And that irrelevance is starting to show its ugly head. And one of these pieces of news I'm thrilled to share with you as well, that in some of our syndicated markets, our election night coverage was dwarfing on radio and TV some of the legacy media affiliates that are connected with ABC and MSNBC, and even like the one or two that are connected loosely with News Nation, which are far better than a lot of their competitors. But this local affiliate media that has been reigning as elites over their entire broadcasting area, it's kind of going the way of the newspapers, especially like the Gannett outlets, for example. And when I look at how this is just developing around the country, I see, well, there's what I expect to see because you do like damage assessment, right? Like, okay, well, we had like a technical glitch at the beginning of the electoral coverage. So we've already since stopped. We've analyzed it and we're like, all right, how can we make sure this never happens again? How can we prepare? Jennifer Rubin for the Washington Post is spending her time right now going after anyone who is questioning the legacy media's coverage of Trump and the shifting of middle America, especially Black and Hispanic men. And I'm telling you, it's incredible. I've never seen such a lack of self-awareness.
Well, it's very true. And you know directly, Tony, because I mean, as somebody who started your radio show and then had success in terms of growing an audience online, you didn't have to necessarily rely on the gatekeepers there in the Hollywood or New York to basically get your message out. And that's what's happened over the course of the last 20 or so years. I mean, I go back to the start of the 2004 election. That's when blogging first became quite popular and people started to realize that there was an alternative way to get their news and information. Now, it took a number of years for different groups of Americans to discover that those outlets existed and really rely on them as a trustworthy source of news. And so when you have a situation where Trump can go on Joe Rogan's show and rack up tens of millions of views, I mean, must really scare all of those people at the Atlantic and the New York Times and NBC News and ABC News, because they are no longer the gatekeepers. They're no longer dictating what it is the American people hear on a daily basis. You'll remember that old story that Walter Cronkite would tell about how when he was broadcasting on the CBS Evening News, he would pull out the New York Times, and basically that's how they determine the news. And they can't set the agenda anymore because they're no longer in control.
I think about, previous organizations that I've worked for, even in the journalistic sphere, who still were kind of desperately clinging to the old way of doing news. And I don't mean the old way of doing news. There are so many that are in this industry that make it sound as though it is too refined and proper to ever ditch and ever get rid of, as though it reduces the credibility of an organization to try new methods. And that was why after the electoral coverage, I had the opportunity to go on a local network in North Dakota, of all places. And this panel of ladies asked me if I thought that the stages of grief the media are currently going through, the denial and the anger is where it seems like we're currently at here, haven't quite reached bargaining, that if this was because they were mad they couldn't hold the reins of censorship anymore. And I said no. And they were shocked because it's such low-hanging fruit, to actually point out that those that want censorship. I said it's buggy whip syndrome. They're old news. That they're no longer the best means of receiving daily updates. They have dragged their heels like Blockbuster Video when Netflix was taking the reins. And so now what you're seeing are a bunch of individuals who have held on to a certain way to cover politics, a certain way to cover conservatives, a certain way to cover middle America, and a certain way to gatekeep other opinions from entering the sphere and challenging them, that they're shocked people in a free market society found another way to get what the Americans need, which is direct access to what is going on with their legislators, not just in the state houses, but also in Washington, D.C. itself. And I mean, it's an incredible privilege to be a part of this. And it's exhausting because you're constantly trying to find out what it is that we're moving to next. But I'm really glad that we're not suffering through buggy whip syndrome of our own at the moment.
Same here. I mean, and I think it's a realization that in order to get the truth, you have to actually leave the Beltway in Washington, D.C. or leave the bubble in New York City. And that's one of the reasons that I'm so proud to have you as a colleague who's there in Indiana, to have other people who regularly are interacting with everyday Americans. Remember, just a week before the election, we sent Fred Lucas to Pennsylvania. We sent Virginia Allen to North Carolina. We sent Elizabeth Mitchell to Michigan. They spent time there actually talking to people and hearing their concerns, listening to what was on their mind.
I think,
and when you're in a position in a New York high rise where you're just dictating to the American people what they should believe all day long, of course you're going to become irrelevant.
And I think that since a couple of months ago, probably more than a year ago now, y'all dispatched Tim Kennedy and I up to Detroit to cover the UAW auto workers strikes outside the Ford Assembly plant north of Detroit. And I think I have referenced interviews that we did there, not even fully scripted, man on the street, me asking the same question to all the people there, but just conversations with those on the picket line. I've referenced those interviews in this particular election coverage series of the campaign more than almost any other data set. It's just getting out to middle America. And by the way, I do want to point out that area north of Detroit was one of the reddest blue areas in the country outside of, I think, Tim Pool's neighborhood in Chicago. And it is this dissatisfaction that no one wants to interview people about, which is wild to me. I didn't go for a career in broadcasting as a kid because I always thought that the field would be oversaturated and there would always be so many people better than I am at covering this kind of stuff. Now I'm looking around and there's not enough because too many people thought that broadcasting meant, well, the way that's going the way of the buggy whip and the cotton gin.
Tony, Andrew Breitbart, the late Andrew Breitbart, always spoke about the importance of having more voices in the conversation. I think too often, to an earlier point you made, those in the legacy media wanted to see fewer voices. It's one of the reasons why I firmly believe that the legacy media outlets and the Biden administration colluded last year to remove Fred Lucas's credentials from the White House.
Right.
I mean, they wanted fewer voices. That Fred was one of 440 reporters who lost his credentials. Why is that? You remember the first Trump term when Sean Spicer was there. I mean, they actually expanded the press pool. They brought in people via Skype. And so I do think that there is a stark contrast here. And anytime anybody tries to tell you that Republicans or conservatives are trying to destroy democracy, just point to the examples on the left. There are so many of them that you can counter with that really shows that they are the ones that are advocating censorship or a restriction on our First Amendment rights.
I can't help but the goofy grin on my face at the moment is reminding that today a lot of our team members were actually posting pictures of their accepted press credentials. Now the election's over and the press credentials have come flooding in. And so I'm really glad to see Fred Lucas back doing the excellent reporting that he has. It was great to get him. He has such a particular way of dissecting the things that go on the Hill in a way that doesn't, again, keeping the gatekeeping language in perspective. He doesn't put it in these highfalutin terms that our viewers, either can't understand or don't bother to dig through the flowery prose. He puts things that are happening in front that are very important in front of our readers in a way that's easy to consume. And again, that kind of media as well is becoming the norm. No longer are we getting the same journalistic accents that kind of remind me of like a modern transatlantic accents and terminologies that have been so popular over the last, close to 50 or 60 years now.
Well, and Tony, you just broke some news inadvertently. Your audience is the first to find out that we have those credentials. So we're very pleased with that. And I'll tell you where the next battlefield is going to be, and it's going to be in the halls of Congress, because there are a few organizations that have a monopoly on coverage. And what they do is they really try to set the narrative, oftentimes put the Republican members of Congress in a bad position where they're not able to advance their legislative agenda because they're oftentimes cheerleaders for the Democrats.
Right.
And so the Daily Signal is going to be an alternative on Capitol Hill in Washington, D.C., and we're very excited about expanding our influence there. And obviously, having the press credentials and the media access will allow us to do that.
This reminds me of when I accidentally broke the news that Greg Price wouldn't be running for another term before his team. I think there were like weeks before announcing. So sorry about that. Me and my mouth. I apologize.
I am thrilled that you did. No need to apologize.
Well, Rob Bluey, president of the Daily Signal, thank you very much for taking a bit of time to come on and discuss our funeral plans for the legacy media.
Thanks, Tony.
We'll be back in just a second. Don't go anywhere. This is the Tony Kinnett Cast here on the Daily Signal, nationally syndicated and first on 93 WIBC.
You're listening to the Tony Kinnett Cast on 93 WIBC.
Well, hello and welcome back to the Tony Kinnett Cast. There's a lot of anticipation currently on the books from pretty much all over the world, and there are so many ways that those on this great big beautiful planet are anticipating the Trump administration and the demise of the Biden-Harris administration. But before we get into those, I would be remiss if I didn't show you the clips of Minnesota Governor Tim Walz, who, by the way, lost his own state legislature in this last election because of how unpopular he is. So you have Tim Walz get up in front of the country and whine about Trump losing. Whine about Trump winning and Harris and him losing. It's quite special.
But look, folks, I just want to acknowledge the moment. It's hard. It's hard to lose. It's hard to understand while so many of our fellow citizens, people that we have fought so long and hard for, wound up choosing the other path.
That's so funny. Oh, gee whiz, I can't figure out why people don't like tampons in the boys' bathroom. What am I supposed to do? I lied about my military career. I loaded a shotgun into my crotch. And also, I can't even describe plays, even though I'm Mr. Super Coachman. What do they want? I've done all the chorus girl kicks I can do. Huh? Fantastic. But that's not the most insufferable thing. Tim Walz's wife, who I can only describe as the most insufferable elementary teacher on the face of the earth, who talks to everyone in that condescending tone of trying to get a toddler to repeat things back to her. She also got up there and started kind of goose screaming. And this is actually kind of funny because, you know, I love it when the liberal school marm gets put in her place.
I'm not sure if you heard me. We cannot and we will not give up this fight.
I do love how the Walzes both clap like drunk seals, like over their head. And by the way, it's not even like real clapping over the head either. Not that anyone actually claps over their head, but it's very awkward and goofy. And I don't know if you heard me. Good riddance to bad rubbish. The rest of the world is reacting in some interesting ways to the impending Trump administration as well. Mainly that the United States has officially confirmed that Qatar, the nation who has given basically free lodging to the leaders of Hamas during the Israeli-Gaza war, basically Qatar is getting ready to kick Hamas out of the country. And the United States has kind of echoed that on the back end because Israel has won that war, and Donald Trump is extremely upset with Iran and its proxies. Why? Well, because the Department of Justice is now basically moving full scale on Iran's open assassination attempts to kill Donald Trump, whether he won or lost the election. So Donald Trump has now got a grudge, and I genuinely believe that we will see the Iranian regime fall and be taken again by its people in this next 4 years. In other fun news, remember how everyone came to bat for FEMA, from the Federal Emergency Management Agency, and said, it's a conspiracy theory. Oh man, the media promised you it's a conspiracy theory. If anyone tells you that the federal government is not helping all disaster victims or not helping some disaster victims, you're wrong, you're terrible, you're evil and gross. Well, according to internal messages obtained by the Daily Wire, a FEMA official ordered relief workers in Florida not to help houses with Trump signs. In fact, here's what the text says. Implement best practices. No one goes anywhere alone. Avoid homes advertising Trump. That's bullet point 2 of like 8. So there you go. I mean, they've got FEMA openly doing stupid stuff. So by the way, I believe that this will be a good way. I think that we'll open a new FOIA investigation into FEMA around Maui and our investigation there initially because something just doesn't smell quite right. Elon Musk has joined Donald Trump and Ukrainian President Zelensky to discuss ending the war with Russia. Some have asked why Elon Musk would be joining these talks. Elon Musk has provided Starlink, which has revolutionized telecommunications on the face of this earth. The idea that we can use satellites to provide instantaneous internet access anywhere in the world basically saved Ukraine from Russian soldiers marching into Kyiv. Elon Musk is extremely responsible for keeping Russia from conquering Ukraine. And so he absolutely should be in there. And by the way, the Donbass and Crimea, which are pro-Russian territories to begin with, are likely never going to be back in Ukrainian hands. So moving into these talks, it does look like Donald Trump actually might be able to bring peace to that region like he was bragging about. On the other hand, Jack Smith, the federal prosecutor illegally appointed unconstitutionally because the Department of Justice has no constitutional authority to create additional offices of special counsel. That is not in their purview. Jack Smith, who basically now is saying, peace out, Girl Scout, I'm out of here. The House Judiciary GOP is now saying, hey, not so fast, and have ordered Jack Smith to preserve his records. And it seems this strongly worded letter has a little bit of a bite to it. Because if Jack Smith shows up without documents, or the documents that he brings don't have metadata, which is like what computers that created the documents and who communicated with them and where they come from, etc., then there will be severe fines, penalties, and punishments. So the political persecution of Biden, Obama, and Harris's political opponents under the Biden DOJ looks to be in a fair amount of trouble. Lastly, but not leastly, Israel is continuing its persecution of the Iranian proxy terror networks in the Middle East because now it doesn't matter what Biden does or doesn't do. Basically, the party's over. The party is over. The Trump foreign policy, which was very Thomas Jeffersonian in its approach, which is don't mess with us, don't mess with our allies, or I might blow you up, Putin, I might bomb you into kingdom come. And by all means, I love that American foreign policy because none of that is getting in a 20-year-long war. It's just wiping someone from the face of the earth. So again, that's good foreign policy, by the way. If any of you out there were wondering what good foreign policy looks like, it's Americans first means if you touch my troops, if you touch who I have deemed my allies, you will not be there tomorrow. That's the only foreign policy, by the way, that's worked on the world stage for time immemorial. Up next, we're going to go into a little bit of mail time because we have a couple of really great questions this week. Stick around. It's the Tony Kinnett Cast here on the Daily Signal, nationally syndicated first on 93 WIBC.
Finally, a sport.
Mail time. Mail time. Mail time.
On the Tony Kinnett Cast.
Okie dokie. So now that we have got just a little bit of the week's shenanigans out of the way, it's time for a little bit of mail time. So mail time works like this. You send in questions about whatever, the serious things and the not so serious things. And I got to tell you, the not serious questions are pretty fantastic, but we've got some really, really, really great questions this week we're going to dig into. The first one is from Lori. She said, can you discuss why urban areas seem to vastly vote Democratic and rural more Republican? And so just trying to wrap my head around why living in a big city makes you lose your mind. I suspect that normal, working, healthy people like to live in the countryside away from other people. The long story short is that different locales do need different things. So there is a different set of policies that are more functional in rural areas, whereas more structured kind of regulation heavy things are useful in areas with large apartment complex buildings and more packed, densely populated streets and houses right next to each other. So for example, I have the very great freedom living outside of the town of which I'm closest to go rattle off a couple of rounds anytime that I would like. Whereas if I was living in like downtown Indianapolis, that's only allowed on the east side. Sorry, no. In all seriousness, it would be a little annoying if at like 2 a.m, your next door neighbor got up and rattled off 18 rounds from the AR-15 in the targets, in the backyard. So also, maybe shoot at a place where you have a little bit more range than a backyard. It's unsafe. So there are some regulations that are necessary. Over time, though, that's turned into Democrats who are more usually for large-scale regulations and Republicans who are usually for less. That also couples with kind of the outlet social issues in which you see people who are usually more under the influence of regulatory policy and who are also usually in the minority demographics who are constantly preached to by Democrats, kind of under that sway. And so what you end up seeing is kind of a weird entitlement system where people in cities, in addition to regulations, often get entitlement programs at a larger rate that are kind of more spread out and more visible. And so those factors usually end up going into why you see urban areas going blue and Republican areas usually more rural. And that's why the fight in the suburbs is so interesting. The next one is from Rex. In the current chaos, do you think the Democrats are going to split in half? So no, I don't think they're going to split in half. I don't think you're going to see like half the party leave and go to the green. Right now, though, you are seeing the consequences of building a party around angry single women who are. The problem is not that they're single and not that they're women. The issue is that it just so happens that a lot of the angry single women whose primary motivation seems to be just like pleasure and entitlement, building a party around that and all of the weird conspiracies that go into fluffing that up, like that they're victims and everything's terrible and that they don't really need faith, family, and community. So kind of political virtue is what gives them purpose in life. Well, that's not actually an effective play to the rest of the country. And saying that someone is wonderful because of what they are instead of the character that they have, yes, it's a good thing to move on from that. And a lot of Democrats are starting to realize that Bill Clintonian Democrats were more palatable. But the problem is when you give the angry single women the reins, it's kind of hard to take the reins back because they're entitled to them. They believe that they are oppressed and they deserve this office chair. And so I think they will eventually get it back together. I'm not sure which way they're going to flip to, but no, the party's probably not going to fracture in half. I mean, you would just see Republicans dominate across the country for the next decade if that were the case. The last question for today is from a guy in the comments, Libertarian Dragon. He says, will the current wars heat up between now and Inauguration Day? My answer to this is no. When I say, so by heat up, I'm going to take a wild stab that you mean like they will get more tenuous around the globe. Like, do I think that Russia's going to do a big final push into Ukraine to desperately try to get in before Trump takes office? No, I don't, because Russia still has to be around on Inauguration Day. 74 days away, that's not a long time. It was just 74 days away from the presidential elections like the other day. That time flies past. And now that there's not really a huge anticipatory action on the local stage, but on the international stage, everyone is trying very desperately to calm things down. You even see this from China. China has basically taken the bootlicking approach because they're in very hot water. Because Trump hates losing. Trump hates to lose. Any ground at all, ever, any place, anywhere. And so the idea that Trump is going to give up Taiwan or give up Israel or allow Putin to walk into Ukraine ain't happening. But also, Trump, unlike Biden, isn't the soft, limp-wristed diplomacy kind of politician. And so what you're seeing is a lot of countries that don't want to be bombed, who are bad and by the way, violent actors in the world who respect strength. And so China knows that it's about to get hit in about 3 different ways. Probably through proxy networks in soft military options, in probably the shoring up of the Japanese economy and the benefit to the United States, and then through the potential of heavy economic tariffs from the United States, which would obliterate China's economy. China's already at the point of civil unrest anyway. And so like the Chinese hegemony is very close to probably entering, if not a civil war, serious unrest over the next decade. And so with Iran probably toppling in the next 4 years, China probably toppling in the next 10, given that, again, there is serious civil unrest in the Chinese Communist Party right now. I mean, what else is there? North Korea? North Korea is failing. South Korea is failing as well. That might actually reignite into a new situation, but I don't see that between now and inauguration date. It's too short of a time. And by the way, it's funny, now that Israel realizes that 74 days is a short amount of time, they're just kind of wiping the Middle East clean of a lot of its enemies. I think the biggest thing you're going to see heat up, at least as far as temperature-wise, is that Israel will probably strike the nuclear facilities in Iran between now and inauguration day, because I don't think that Donald Trump wants that to be something he has to deal with internationally during his watch. So it's very likely that they get that done now. I think that's probably why Benjamin Netanyahu called Trump to congratulate him even before the election was called. So that's kind of my thoughts on that. And could I be wrong? Absolutely. Foreign policy is not something I know as well as education policy, for example. I get the general concepts, obviously, but I'm not going to tell you guys that I'm the world's master on it. So I bring on the guests. We will be back on Tuesday. Monday is Veterans Day. Have a wonderful weekend and a thoughtful holiday. This is the Tony Kinnett Cast on the Daily Signal, 93 WIBC.